for joining us today. Happy Monday. I am Lottie Bazley, Internal Comms Manager at Staffbase, and I will be your host for today. I must admit, I am not a morning person, so very much appreciate everyone being here today. We will give it a minute or so before we kick things off to make sure that everyone is in and ready. And hopefully this morning you have all been working on your to-do lists for the week. Or if you're organised enough, you did that on Friday afternoon. But I wanted to ask everyone, just to get us going in the chat, have you ever heard of the phrase, eat the frog, which basically means the worst task on your to-do list, do it first so that it's out the way. So I want to ask everybody, what is your frog that you are going to eat this week? Tim, do you have a frog that you need to eat this week?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think it's responding to CC emails.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of them. Get rid of them by broadly saying, actually, unless I'm required to do something, I'm not going to engage with this.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds a bit aggressive, but I'm not a fan of a CC'd email without an instruction.
No, those are the ones as well where it feels like such a good little task. You're like, oh, okay, I can just scrub that off by saying I've read it. Like there's no to-do that comes.
I don't think you could do this now, but I used to have an auto reply on CC'd email messages that says, I don't read these. It's a bit rude, isn't it? I don't think you could do it now. But
no, I love that. Love that for you. Anyone else? Let me know what your frog is. I think mine is probably, I've got some reporting, like analytics stuff to do, which I don't find, it's not that bad, but I'm a comms person, so I'm very much words rather than numbers. So yeah. I just find it a really tedious task, but I will definitely make sure that I will get that done today. So today's webinar is all about engaging the front line. And I am joined by Tim Robson from NSU Media, who has some very cool case studies to share with us today. Tim, I will hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Lottie, and morning, everyone. Happy Monday from me as well. Nice to be with you. Yeah, I'm the MD of NSU Media. We're an employee comms and development agency, and we've been going since about 2008-9. We launched actually out of Marks and Spencer. That's my background, and we're a mix of operational leadership and kind of brand and marketing, and we describe ourselves. Like that we're an internal marketing company, but for internal employees. I don't know, Tash, if you can pop that slide up there. We have an idea that every idea you need to communicate with a team needs to be sold internally. Quite often, teams just use organisation and structure as a cascade mechanism. Mm-hmm. Something's started at the top and then cascaded down. And the assumption is by the time it reaches people that need to do something, it's all been understood. Whereas actually we think it needs to be marketed and it needs to be sold, even if it's a self-evident idea. And so we do campaigns and communication for a variety of people. And there's a bunch of different clients that we work with across both private and public sector, a variety of different brands. I don't know if Tash, if you can pop that up. There's we started with M&S, they were our first client, and right the way through financial services, sport, which will come into the NHS. And you'll see there bottom right, we've just started working with the Jockey Club in the last couple of years, which is really interesting. So I'll be at Cheltenham later on in the week, because believe it or not, they're doing preparation already for next March, which is when the festival is. Anyway, that's us.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Tim. I also noticed that we're both wearing the exact same tops that we are now in our intro slide. It's the classic black tee. So yes, thank you very much, Tim. As I said, I'm Lottie Bazley, Senior Internal Comms Manager at Staffbase. I actually started my career looking after an 80% remote workforce. And got thrown in pretty much at the deep end because I took up the comms role right before COVID, the pandemic, so kind of working through that. About 4 years ago, I joined Staffbase as a consultant to help our customers achieve their internal comms goals using our platform. And now, kind of true Inception style, I work in the internal comms team at Staffbase. So for those that haven't heard of Staffbase, we are the first AI native employee experience platform, revolutionizing employee intranets and employee comms by unleashing the power of agentic AI. We have more than 2,000 customers, companies like Adidas, DHL, the NHS, and we aim to inspire people to kind of achieve great things together. So we connect employees through branded app, intranet, email, SMS, digital signage, and Microsoft 365 integrations, all of which are very helpful to connect with both desk and non-desk workers, the latter of which we are here to talk about today. So we will have some time at the end of the session for questions. So please ask your questions in the chat. And we will kick things off. Tim, I will hand back over to you to kick us off with some stats.
Great, thanks, Lottie. And the reason why we're talking and the reason why we've connected is a kind of joint passion for frontline support and engagement. And that's the thing I was saying, we started, 2008, 2009. If we'd had Staffbase then, life would have been a lot easier. We repositioned as an agency in 2014 to focus just on frontline, junior and emerging managers. And it's this slide that's the reason, really. Well over 80%, that number that's up there is probably conservative for many of our clients. It's north of that. 80% of people who work in an organisation are managed by a junior manager. So our very first piece of work with M&S was with the job role that's described as section manager. So you'd be looking after a very small section, maybe with a team of 10 to 16 people, but they manage over 92% of people who engage with any customer on the shop floor. And most of our clients, that's north of 90%. We believe that number's just simply too big to ignore. But for an M&S, there's 4,000 of them. You see, we work for KFC. There's 1,000 of those managers. And so once the scale goes over a few hundred, it's very difficult to get people together. And you can't take them off the shop floor to do this, to dial into a webinar, because they're on the shop floor running things or they're making things happen. And so that grid that you see on the right-hand side shows that the more senior you are, the more contact you have with other colleagues in terms of development, but the further away you are from where the action is with customers and with large-scale teams. And the flip side would be the same for those junior managers, high level of customer contact, high level of employee contact, but less development. And so the grid that's going across the top, if you can kind of bend your neck, goes customer contact, first lines and kind of staff interaction, organisational profile and attention, on the job support, and then leadership development and investment. And the more senior you are, you get more investment often from an organisation, but less customer contact, and the flip side would be the same. So I think the statistic, and it won't have changed, is that for every $10 that's spent on exec development, $1 spent on junior managers. And it's a problem. We know that our organisations are being led, represented and run by junior managers, but there's too many of them in too many places to engage with them properly, and that feeling of isolation spreads to their teams and customers. So we say what you do, your teams do, and what your teams do, your customers are talking about. And so engaging the front line for us is really important. And we have a bit of an approach, really, which in terms of the way that we create our content, which in terms of messaging and internal communication, every single message is competing for attention. We're kind of in the competition game right now. And competing with people's attention means that what it shows up like, we have this phrase with our clients, is that we say no one cares. No one cares. And it's not that people don't care. It's not that people organisationally don't want to care. It's that they can't, because we're bombarded by so much information and it shows up like they don't care. So when organisations say we told them, we've engaged our teams, we've emailed everyone, we've updated people, we've invited people, the question always is, well, did it land? And for us, it's these three things. Give me a reason to listen to you, give me a reason to kind of believe, and show me it works. And so a combination of flipping our attention to junior and emerging managers and creating content that's compelling enough to cut through all of that noise. For us, that's been transformational. And the combination of something like a platform like Staffbase means that then you can get those messages out at high scale. We can do better, and we should do better. And so I want to tell a few stories as to where we've done that. It was transformational for us as an organisation. The first program we ran, as I say, was with M&S, with those 4,000 managers. We did that for about 7 years, and all of a sudden we could connect people across an organisation. And then we started working with Liverpool Football Club in 2015, 2016. They were about to build a new main stand, which was going to significantly increase their match day attendance. And if you know anything about sport, live sport, whether it's horse racing or football or rugby, clubs have fixed cost assets that are used semi-regularly. So for a Liverpool, you've got this enormous site at Anfield, which on a really good season with a deep cup run would be open 30 times a year, 32 times a year. And that's why you see organisations and brands now doing gigs and festivals and all sorts of other things that go on. And so what goes alongside a fixed cost venue that operates like that is that most people are on 0 hours contracts. And so for Liverpool, the staff level on match day was going to go from something like 1,500 to 3,000 overnight when the new stand opened. And they approached us to develop and engage all 3,000 people. And with our philosophy of supporting the front line, what we said was, actually, don't do that. You're not going to get 3,000 people all together without doing kind of a big event that's going to only be a one-off that people will forget. Instead, let's focus with finding who are the people that manage most of the people. Well, what we found was it was a group of about 150 managers, which was stewards and hospitality and ticket office and the retail store and car park management, for example. Let's get those 150 people together and let's invest in them. And we did that for 5 seasons, and it was a phenomenal program, and it had about 2 or 3 key things that the club wanted to make happen. They wanted to engage people in an overall better fan experience. They wanted to increase match day revenue, and they wanted to create the best match day visiting experience across the Premier League. And so what we did was, over a mix of live events and then storytelling, we would gather everybody together 3 or 4 times a year, and then we started creating filmed content that we distributed to people throughout the season. When we first started working with them, 0 hours contracts and so on, you'd just get a text message, do you want to work the game? And you'd reply back, yeah, I'll work the game. And then they'd get a reply, you're working the game. And that was all the contact you had before you rocked up 4 hours before kickoff to get a briefing. What we created was a program where we gathered everyone, and then we sent regular content out by email and on a website that was unique to those people to give them content for the match day ahead. We did a follow-up podcast phone call the day after the match to look at how did it go operationally, who could you shout out, people that performed. And we did a mix of central messaging and storytelling. Because what was remarkable was what we found was things that we weren't expecting. So the 150 managers had never been in a room together. There were stewards who'd never talked to concourse teams. And they were talking, of course, with the same customers. So they would go in to get their seat, and then they'd queue for a pint at half time, but it was 2 different teams that were dealing with them. So connecting stewards with hospitality teams just so that they could understand what each other was doing made a difference. And then an example the other thing we did, which took ages to do, was we got Jurgen Klopp, who was manager at the time, to record a message to that population saying, thank you for what you do off the pitch, because it supports what we do on the pitch. Because football's a weird business, right? You can't talk to the product, you can't talk to the players, you can't get your shirt signed, and you don't get to go on the pitch. But giving that team access to the manager made a massive difference in terms of engagement. And the results were really good. You know, match day revenue, I think originally it was supposed to be going up about 20%. It went up 300%. Liverpool were number one for fan experience in the Premier League for 3 seasons in a row in the time that we were working with them. And the retention level increased as well for staff. And retention is the key thing probably to talk about here in terms of engaging the frontline and the impact you can have. That kind of top middle picture on that slide is Lucy Cower. And actually, I think she's in the middle as well. Lucy runs the away end, which is a mix of home fans and away fans, and so it's pretty lively. Depending on the profile of the fans and the time of the kickoff across a weekend, it can be very busy. In a 0 hours environment, retention for security teams is massive. Retention for stewards is massive, and we'd heard this word. Retention, because we'd focused for the first 2 seasons, it sounds odd, but we focused on briefings. You know, a match day operation runs on briefings, and no one had ever trained team managers to brief, whether it was organising a good brief, whether it was using a microphone, whether it was gathering everyone together. So if you see that middle picture, I think that's Lucy with both stewards and hospitality teams in the Stadium Bowl. Sounds obvious, but that wasn't happening before. It was kind of sporadic conversations all over the place with people half on their phone and half listening, half not. And we kind of made a big old focus on that. But then this word retention came up. People saying, oh, retention's an issue. And what it was, which we weren't aware of, was for head stewards, you need a certain number, or for the stewarding team, you need a number of stewards on every match day to get you to keep your safety certificate. But if you don't have a good experience and you're on a 0 hours contract, you don't have to come back. You don't have to go again. Or you can pick a nice fixture when it's a big fixture at the weekend rather than, you know, Burnley on a wet Wednesday or whatever they would say. So we got hold of the retention figures, and as you would expect, the variance was big. We'd have some people had retention of over 90%, and some people had retention of 40%, which meant that they were turning over half of their stewards every game. And so we found Lucy, whose retention level was the highest across the club, and we spent a day with her and we filmed her and we asked her, what do you do? And she did some really simple things that you would expect. You know, she was on time, she was high energy, she said hello to everyone, she knew everybody's name, she welcomed back the people who were there for the repeat staff. She gave a big welcome and introduction for people who were new. Really interestingly, she made a decision not to drink before the game. That might sound like an odd thing, but if you think about the number of people that turn up on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday lunchtime game having been out the night before, and we didn't say to people don't drink, but we did say that's interesting. And so we created a film with, you know, these are the 5 things that Lucy does, do those. And that was really successful because it was both acknowledging the power of the frontline team, and it was also, with credibility, sharing stories of people that were really making something happen. And so, Liverpool was a great piece of work to do, and they're a really interesting bunch, but they had been underinvested in and ignored. And so I remember an event where we got the then CEO to come along just to say thank you, just to acknowledge that what they did made a difference. So this is 150 people impacting 3,000 people who were impacting 60,000 fans 30 times a year. That small group of people, giving them content, regular contact in a way that matched them and matched their lifestyle, so they could look at content on their phones rather than having to respond to an email, really made a difference. So that was a really interesting piece of work to work on.
Yeah,
and then another.
Sorry,
do you want to jump in? Yes.
Jump in and say, we Staffbase did an employee communication impact study a little while ago, and one of the stats that came out of that is that the immediate supervisor is the most trusted source of information for employees. So that kind of like manager working on the managers, rather than, I think it's a very good idea. Like you say, I can't get 3,000 people in a room, but how can I make an impact on as many of those people as possible? And I think a tough challenge for 0 hours contract people, right? Because you don't have that time, the kind of touch points with them because they're on a 0 hours contract. So why would they spend their time where they're not being paid reading communications about things? Very, very cool.
Yeah, and the stakes are really high. If I'm, the significant number of people that would work at Anfield or in any kind of sporting event would be students, and a lot of them wouldn't be football fans. And so but then if I'm a fan and you're pouring me a pint at lunchtime, I expect you to be as interested as me. Otherwise, why would you be here? And so trying to help those teams understand, and of course, we've always said when someone goes to the pub on a Friday or has a coffee with someone and someone says, how's work? They don't talk about the exec team. They don't talk about the strategy. They don't talk about the board or the SLT. They talk about their line manager. Yeah. And their line manager is impacting what work means. Well, if that line manager is underinvested in, ignored, struggling, or somehow out of their depth or disconnected with their peer group, that they're going to feel that. And so that's why Staffbase and platforms like Staffbase work, because they enable you to connect people and for people to feel I'm part of something bigger than myself, rather than feeling on my own. And that's super relevant. I'll talk about that when we in a few minutes.
Yeah, very cool story. I think one of the things that I've, certainly from my previous role, I worked at an energy company called OVO, and I looked after the engineers, so the smart meter engineers that would go out to people's customers' homes. And I think when you have those kind of deskless roles, a lot of people get promoted because they're just really good at doing the job, not because they specifically want to go down a managerial route. So they get promoted into these manager roles, having had no experience of people management whatsoever. And I think a lot of companies are just guilty of leaving them to it. They say, right, you're really good at your job, so therefore you become a manager. And one of the things that I worked on was a kind of helping managers deliver a message, so kind of helping them to become better communicators. But also we did a lot of work around these toolbox talks, so similar to the little picture in the middle that you say, they're kind of getting people together once every couple of weeks and kind of helping the managers deliver the messages that needed to be given to these people. And I went to various ones across the country, and the consistency before we put this new kind of process in place, the consistency was non-existent. Some of the managers were super engaging. Some of them literally just clicked through the slides and read off the slide verbatim, and just kind of empowering them to, be better at delivering those messages. We improved the consistency across, but also how the engineers felt after those toolbox talks. So rather than be like, right, I've got to go and, sit and read off a slide, it was very much about a collective and getting together and kind of being motivational, rather than just, I've got to go to, this town hall and watch this slide deck from my manager.
Totally. And what you've said about people being promoted, I mean, you can see I'm old enough to have been doing this for a little while, right? Years and years ago, when I was first promoted, I was working in what would have been a contact center, one of the very early kind of setups of contact center in an insurance company. And I'd done pretty well in the role. I was very young and technically okay. My accuracy was good. And so I was promoted on a Friday and I became a team leader on a Monday. And I suddenly was responsible for the performance of other people. I had one person on long-term sick and I had two people who were underperforming, and I was utterly clueless. And frankly, I was a much, much better third line, fourth line manager than I ever was first line. It's hard. It's really, really hard. And nothing has really changed. We still meet managers who've been promoted because they're technically good. But they haven't been. Nothing magical has happened. We work now with clients, so we work with Nationwide Building Society, and we've created for them a program for managers. In their first year, when you're promoted, what do you do? It might sound like briefings and doing team meetings is a really basic thing, but most of us weren't taught how to do that. Most junior managers operating in that lower tier, which I hate to say lower, but it is lower organisationally, they're not given development and support and tools, but they're managing the majority of people in an organisation. I mean, imagine learning to drive like that. where you just go, well, here are the keys, just kind of figure it out. You'll be all right. Eventually you'll learn. And eventually you will learn, but it won't be safe. And so, yeah, interestingly, just focusing on that stuff. I remember at Liverpool, you just kind of jogged my memory. One of the first things we did was look at the stewarding briefings. And I remember the first person we heard just said, right, let's start with the negatives. And just started with, ticking people off for the things that hadn't worked at the previous game. And you go, yeah, I wonder why people look disengaged. I wonder why people don't want to be here. And it's not about just being positive, but it is about treating people and treating it like it matters. I want to talk as well about another case study. We've been working with KFC for a number of years. And so KFC are an interesting organisation. They've got about 1,000 restaurants. They're going to be growing. Most of you will have seen, if you caught the news, expanding significantly over the next 3 years. But they've got just over 1,000 restaurants across the UK. And their restaurant general manager, RGM population, they manage 93% of all UKI KFC employees. And so we launched, coming out of COVID, a program called RGM Elevate. And RGM Elevate was a program to engage restaurant managers in best practice and storytelling across the UK. You can imagine, with 1,000 restaurant managers and a restaurant to run, they don't get an opportunity to all meet together. KFC historically have done one or 2 day conference once a year that is broadly a celebration and a kind of push of new central messages from a strategic perspective, but then a celebration and a big old party to say thank you for RGMs. Well, that's 2 days out of 250 working days in a year. And so RGM Elevate is a program where a regular drumbeat of stories across the network where RGMs can hear from other RGMs about what they're up to. And what we did with them was a rhythm and a routine of what we call push and pull content. So push content was centralized messaging. So I might do a film, or we might do a film that says, how do you manage your P&L effectively? This is some central standards, 5 or 6 minutes in a restaurant on do these 5 things and it really makes a difference. We're not asking for your opinion. We're telling you these are the things that make a difference. And then a pull story would be, we'd find a manager who was really making something happen with P&L and go, this is what I do. And so that what you're kind of can see in terms of those pictures, top left is a manager called Ria. And Ria was one of the first people we filmed coming out of COVID. And so you'll remember that restaurants were open, but you couldn't go in, but you could get deliveries. There was a period of time. And so we filmed in a restaurant where you've got delivery guys just coming in and out. What makes a difference? Well, people hadn't really thought about building a relationship with the delivery team. Because they're just someone who arrives on a bike and in a car and then they're gone again. Well, in the time we were there just making the film that we made, one person came back 3 times. It's like, well, get to know their name, get to know their family's name, because actually those guys can recommend which restaurants are best to visit, which comes up in our feed. And so just hearing from Ria, here's what I do. So we would send a film out and then go, here are the 5 things that's really making a difference. Emily Lloyd is on the left-hand side, and she focused specifically on a turnaround situation, going into a restaurant that was failing, being kind of parachuted in. What did I do to turn things around from a communication perspective, a staff engagement perspective, and then a sales perspective? And then at the bottom, the lady in the cap is Lou. And Lou just ran a super efficient operation. And so she was all over it in terms of the numbers. But most of that was about setup and clarity for her team. What does good look like? And so what we were able to do is go, just do what Lou does, just do what Emily does, just do what Ria does. And all of those managers have been promoted and moved on to other roles. Now Emily on the left-hand side is an area coach, so she's now managing about 8 to 9 restaurant managers. And so that, again, the same principle of taking RGMs, 1,000 people who won't be on a structure chart, but who are managing 93% of people who visit a KFC. They represent the brand in a local town or in a local area. And often they're taught, typically in the quick food market, here's how to do the job, be safe and legal. But this was about how do we help you really deliver and really show how you deliver the overall experience. And our belief across 1,000 managers is excellence is in you. The answers are in the room. You just have to get the answers out from the population and then distribute it in a way that makes it easy. A platform like Staffbase gives you exactly the ability to do that. So we would have regular editorial meetings with KFC to say what's the journey of the organisation over the next quarter, and then we would find content and find the stories that we could do as push and pull. And we found that those that engaged with the content got better results. They got higher sales, better staff satisfaction, and better employee satisfaction. So, it kind of answered itself. Talk to a team and they'll respond.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. And I think when it comes to certainly one of the challenges that when I was at OVO, I was a customer of Staffbase, so I implemented the Staffbase app. And one of the things that we found was that kind of like knowledge sharing amongst people that wouldn't necessarily, they're not in an office, in a meeting, chatting to each other. There's the area manager in, the north of Scotland versus the one in Cornwall. That both have great expertise, but they didn't have that connection point to be able to learn from each other. And it's not just about, sending managers on training courses of how to run an efficient restaurant. It's like, let's hear from you because you're doing a great job of managing your restaurant or, managing your team of engineers or whatever it is, that kind of like peer-to-peer learning, but just having that connection point, kind of creating that place where the learning lives is very, very.
Yeah, and I mean, my belief is I've not done any deep science on it, but my belief is that any organisation that creates a vision that says, here's where we want to go, whether it would be sales, service, guest experience, overall employer brand, for example, the only reason why that strategy exists is because the organisation's seen enough of a representation internally to know that it's possible. Otherwise, it wouldn't do it because it would be too hit and hope. And that's where the lines of if we could just bottle that come from. I mean, we hear that every week. If we could just bottle that, if we could just do what that person's doing or that person's doing or that person's doing. Across a KFC with 1,000 restaurants, every attribute of an absolute top-performing world-class restaurant manager would be there in the kind of sum total of all of those performances. What we're trying to do as an agency and what Staffbase enables you to do as a tool is to bottle it. Find the people who are doing those aspects of the job, because it won't. The idea of the well-rounded leader is a bit of a myth. What you'll find is that you've got people who are brilliant at some bits and not so good at others. Well, if I'm amazing at running a drive-through, I might not be as good at some other aspects of the job. But if I'm brilliant at running a drive-through, those skills could help everyone. And I can learn from other people who are better at other parts of the job. So connect everyone, and together everybody rises. I don't think you need to go on an external course or read another book from somewhere else. It's normally we say excellence is in you. The answers are in the room. But you have to get them out. You have to believe and look and put the effort in to find them and then tell everyone. And of course, when you find a performer, these restaurant managers, when we walked in, would say, what are you doing then? What are you doing special? And they go, I'm not doing anything. I'm just being me. And so connecting an individual with how their performance could benefit the whole organisation, that feels brilliant. Managers would go, can I show my friends and family this film? Because it's like, I thought I was just doing this anyway. I'm just doing my job. Well, no, what you're doing and what you're bringing is competency, energy, and a vibe that could help all of us. If we could just bottle that, is not a dream. It's possible. And then one final organisation, which is a bit of a gear shift, is we are working and have worked for the last 5 years in the NHS, and we're a private sector company, private sector background, largely private sector clients, and so the shift into the public sector has been interesting and honestly very challenging. You don't need me to tell you the challenges of the NHS. We started working with University Hospitals Birmingham just coming out of COVID. Now, there's 26,000 people working across 4 main hospital sites in Birmingham, huge employer in the area. And we started coming out of COVID with just a regular phone call once a week between me and the COO as a recorded Teams call. Again, this idea of how do you connect a population and give them messaging? Well, if you're the COO, you think about the messaging that was coming out over COVID. I mean, it's just relentless, and the environment was really tricky, managing cold sites and moving people across different disciplines and so on. And we started with just me sitting down with the COO with a mug of tea, 7 a.m, going, where are you at this week? And the conversation was not, oh, we've got a very clear plan. You know, there was this remarkable period in COVID, wasn't there, where everyone knew that no one knew what they were doing. And it whilst it was an awful and deeply challenging environment, it released something in organisations that we've lost since, which is when you don't know what you're doing, there's an organisational humility, and there's an openness, and there's a vulnerability. And so sitting with the COO going, if I'm honest, I woke up this morning and I had nothing. Like, I don't know what to do today. So I would then say, you know, how are you going to get yourself back on track? I'm going to go in a ward. I go and walk on a ward, and I go and meet people who are being treated, and I realise what we're here for. Now, hearing as a frontline worker the COO talk about that, it kind of takes the organisation, it does that. Just in a Teams call for 7 minutes that can be sent out within an hour. And so using a platform to be able to communicate that message makes a huge difference. The NHS is remarkable and challenging, and this is not a criticism, but it's just an observation. Not with this particular trust, but with another trust, we were looking at how do we do a program for their junior managers. And so I asked this very innocent question: where are all your managers? And they didn't have an HR system that showed where all of those people were. Weren't aware, and they didn't have a list or a spreadsheet or a database saying where the managers were. And so it's this question came up: what does it look like to work in an organisation where no one knows where you are, and yet you're supporting well over 90% of people who are impacting with patients and their families? Because every person that's treated in a hospital, their family is part of that story, because it's what they talk about before, during and after. So we're doing a very similar sort of program, as you heard with KFC, push and pull messaging, where we'll give them access to senior people they wouldn't normally have access to, push messaging about leadership in what are our priorities for the year, and then engagement with frontline teams. So people that are really making something happen. How are they leading? How are they communicating? How are they connecting with each other? And they get kind of alerts on their phone to go, there's a new piece of content that's landed. This idea of push and pull and push and pull and push and pull just creates a rhythm, and it's had a fantastic impact. We initially opened it just to a particular grading that was the most junior managers, and within a year it was opened up to all line managers, because all line managers need it. And so trying to connect a population of 4,000 managers managing across overall 26,000 people made a big difference. It really, I think what we do, Lottie, is really simple, but the mindset shift to take that 80% slide and flip it and go, actually, to really get cut through and really get traction, we need to prioritize the people that manage most of the people, and use technology to be able to deliver that message, to get the best stories and to give a clear direction. If you really do that, and you really mean it, and you really believe it, people can tell. And I think teams and customers end up at the back end getting the benefit of that.
Forgive me, sorry, Tim. I was just taking a sip of water as you finished then. Bad timing. No, I love those stories. And I think that it's a very good point that you make about that kind of vulnerability of organizations when the pandemic hit and everyone was just thinking, oh my God, what are we doing? And people were happy to be vulnerable and open and honest about the fact that we were all just trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
And I think that leadership vulnerability plays a really big part in just kind of opening up organizations. And like you say, that kind of action that you did about sort of bringing the organization together in the middle.
Yeah.
One thing, though, that I've experienced is that there are definitely some leaders that I have worked with that have been more open to being vulnerable than others.
Yeah.
How might you, if you have one of those leaders that is kind of less open, less wanting to be vulnerable, how do you kind of work with them to convince them that it is the kind of the right thing to do?
Yeah, I think I was thinking that just as you were talking that I do think we're seeing a shift in that now, and we're having to work harder. I think we've forgotten really quickly the benefit of that level of honesty. I quite liked it. This sounds like an odd thing to say. When I knew a manager couldn't stand up and say, "Here's the plan, and here's where we'll be in 2 years' time," because it's kind of like, well, now what you got? Well, now what I've got is intent and care, and all I had was intent and care. Here's what we believe we should be doing, and what the right thing is, and let's check: is everyone okay? Is that less relevant now? No, it's super relevant now. But I don't know why. But as leaders, I think we think we're supposed to know the answer, and I don't think we do always. I think we need to be able to show intent and care and be just one step ahead. And so I think what I again spend time doing is explaining to managers the benefit of them connecting with the humanity of someone. So we don't prepare questions beforehand, or if we do, I go off question when I interview someone, and the team does the same. So they're looking for, we want to tell stories of things like, an average SLT member wants to remind people of the buzzwords in the strategy that they spent ages developing and put out on a slide so that everyone understands. Actually, what the team needs to know is that they're in safe hands. And so asking questions of a senior person who's just been promoted, well, congratulations, talk us through the interview process, and then telling an everyman story of what it's like to go for an interview, all of a sudden makes me human. And we've sometimes done it through, in our programs, kind of campaign weeks, almost epic fail week. Tell us your stories. Tell us your stories of where you got something wrong and you learned a lesson. And if someone's far enough away from it, they can tell that story dispassionately and it doesn't feel like it undermines them. But you're absolutely right. We are increasingly having to challenge managers who believe that clarity and a definite answer is what people need. I think everybody knows that that's not really how the world works, and of course, when the chips are down, that becomes clear, as per COVID. So, yeah, we try and we spend quite a lot of time convincing people. You might not think it matters, take the shirt and tie off and just be in a t-shirt, or can we film you at home? The best ones are where you can film people at home. Some people are really reticent to do that, but it makes a difference because they get a completely different version of themselves.
Yeah, great shout. Love that. And I think it's that, for me, I think it's a really important thing is that you see these SLT members as human beings as well as great leaders, and that it's about finding the balance of, yes, I'm, capable of leading this company to achieve X, Y, Z, but I'm also someone who picks the kids up from school and needs to leave early on a Tuesday because I've got basketball with the kids or whatever,
Completely, and actually that's really important. So I remember filming one of the board members at M&S who'd been at a conference and made some gag about how much they loved their dog. and that they love their dog more than their family or something like that. And so we went and filmed her walking the dog.
Very cool.
And the quality of the conversation while just walking a dog. And then all of a sudden people go, oh yeah. Oh, of course. That's how it works. Whereas, yes, the corporate messaging is really important. And also with the teams themselves. So you think about, 1,000 managers across KFC, those people are doing remarkable things outside of their day job. They're caring for families. They're looking after children. They're involved in the local community and running things. And so, I remember filming a junior manager who was also a GB triathlete and who would work in the day and train in the evening, and the mentality was the same. And so, and a lady who had been historically a victim of domestic abuse and had created a community group based around Zumba for her colleagues and for friends, and that drove how she managed and drove how she led. And so making a film that showed her at work and in a Zumba class just goes, this is the person. She was just a junior manager working in an organisation, but she had a life story that was impacting hundreds every week. It's really easy to do those. Those stories are there. You need both the desire and the platform, and it's all possible.
Thank you so much, Tim. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please add them into the chat. Question from me though, Tim, you've talked about all of these incredible stories that you can tell, but how do you source that? How do you find the person who is the athlete? Where do you get those stories from?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier editorial kind of meetings. So for our clients, we'll have a project team, and we'll kind of meet every 6 weeks or something and say what's going on in the organisation. And then there's a constant churn of finder stories. And so what we do is we qualify every story, because sometimes people go and interview this person, they've got a great story to tell. And actually, when you spend some time chatting with them, the story might not quite be the story. And so we pre-qualify, and then we'll go and spend some time. So if we given 10 different names, we might end up filming 2 or 3 of them. But it's a constant kind of drumbeat of we need stories, let's find people. And then we also ask people if you think you've got a story to tell. And what's really nice about that is that it means that people keep their ear to the ground all the time. So saying to area managers and to regional managers, when you're out and about, look for the superstars. Don't ignore them. Don't just say thank you. Ask them a follow-up question. What is it that you're doing? Why do you think you're performing so well? What's going on for you? Just asking those simple questions. And again, people tend to go, "Oh, well, I'm just doing what I'm doing." But I remember one manager who was their job in KFC. It was fundamentally they were working to work one of 2 jobs to provide. The motivation was for her was to provide for her children. That was why she was working, and that was why she did what she did. Now, what did it show up like? It actually showed up with someone who led their team and delivered great results. But the motivation was to look after their kids. So let's talk to that manager. And those editorial meetings were constantly on the kind of lookout and chatting to people about what a potential story is. Not every story is a story. But if you look hard enough, you'll find them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question from me in terms of kind of content type for frontline workers. So kind of anecdotally, when I was working at OVO, I thought when we introduced Staffbase, we had the ability to kind of send out all types of different content, so written, video, etc. And I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create loads of engaging video content that the engineers can watch in their van whilst they're eating their lunch, for example. So we started creating all of these videos, and I was finding my engagement stats were going down. And I was like, why is nobody watching these videos? We've just created this perfect thing for them. And I spoke to one of the engineers and I said, have you watched any of those videos? And he said, no. I asked him why. And he said, well, the time that I look at the content on because they had an app, the time that I look at the content is when I'm in a customer's home and we have to wait, 5 or 10 minutes for this process to happen in the background. And he said, I don't want to sit there in a customer's house watching a video because they might think I'm just on YouTube or whatever. That 5 minutes I spent to look through the app and I read the content. So I realized that I thought I'd, created this amazing, engaging video content for everyone, but they just didn't have the time to look at it. It wasn't the right type.
Yeah.
So what we then did was turn those into kind of podcasts so they could listen to them whilst they were driving. So we had the video, but we also had it transcribed and, we had the podcast, which is ideal because you have, the best of every world. But obviously that's a lot of work that goes into, every post. And we can't do that for every piece of content that we're providing for people. But have you found there's a kind of sweet spot of what is the best type of content for frontline people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a really good question about where people are at, and that bit about no one cares is that what's really interesting is the power is in the receiver, not in the sender. So pre Staffbase, for example, or pre other platforms, you will go, we'll get you in a conference, we'll push a message to you, you don't have any option. Whereas now, if a video is not any good or if a post isn't any good, I'll just ignore it. And who's right? Well, I'm right because I'm the audience. And so the power shifted. So our feet are held to the fire for creating content that's good enough. And it needs to be good enough that you would choose to look at it over something else. And so our experience has been exactly the same, is that for some clients, podcast audio works much better than video. We've had a lot of success with what we often do with a number of clients is we send out weekly nudges. So these are highly visual kind of PDFs, which are supposed to be borderline irritating prompts. Okay. So you're kind of supposed to look at it and go, oh, okay, but I'm on the hook now. So, did you get enough sleep last week? No, what your team probably didn't notice. Or did they? Or engage with a performance issue that you've been engage with a performance issue this week that you've been avoiding. And if you think you haven't got anything again, it's supposed to be kind of a twinkle in its eye and supportive but honest, and that just drops in someone's inbox and it flicks up and they don't have to do anything with it, but it will percolate ideas, I suppose. And so whether it's written content, audio, visual, whether it's video, whether it's a mix of everything, I think the answer is go to where people are and find out what's going on and then create content that matches where they're at. And so there's a question in there about how do you create a campaign for people with high workloads. Our belief is if you create good enough content, people will look at it by choice. And they're prioritizing based on either what keeps their interest or what's a priority for them. And so, with mobile phones and with laptops or whatever, people are looking at content all over the place. And so we're saying, how do we compete with what people will look at in the evenings? Because the reality is people are still thinking about work in the evenings. It's that kind of unavoidable. And so I think it's to the pressures on the storyteller or the pressure on the content creator to create content that's compelling enough that people would choose to look at it or read it, and if not, ask the question why.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, it's kind of putting the ownership back on, I guess, the people creating the comms rather than me saying, oh, no one's reading this. That's annoying for us.
Yeah.
No one's reading this. Okay, why do we think that is?
Yeah, I mean, bizarrely, I was as surprised as people listening to this probably will be, but in an NHS hospital environment, one of the best places to deliver messaging is in posters on the back of toilet doors. And it kind of, I resist it, Lottie, if I'm honest. I kind of go, we can do better than that. We can do this. And it's like, no, like, that's what I remember. Because that meets me where I'm at. Well, okay.
Yeah.
So, it's like, yes, if we're going to be we're an internal marketing team. So where's the market? Oh, the market's moved or the market shifted. You can't say, come over here because we've got this new piece of technology. It's amazing. Or, we've created content that we thought was absolutely remarkable and it's got like tumbleweed response. And then we've created other things that we thought was borderline average and it's been phenomenal and gone viral. Well, who's right? Well, the audience is right. The audience is always right.
Yeah.
I'm excited by that because it means you have to just get super flexible. So yeah, posters on toilet doors, who would have thought? But in some places that's relevant.
And understanding your audience, I think, is genuinely one of the best things you could ever do as an internal communicator. And I think in my, as I said, in my previous role in OVO, I was a trainer before I became the comms person. And it was at a time of substantial growth. So I'd met about 50% of the workforce that I was communicating to.
Yeah.
And we used to have to do this thing where you went out with an engineer for the day. So you spent a day with them driving around in the vans, going to the customers' homes and understanding what that day looked like. And I mean, aside from the video blip, I truly believe that knowing your audience really, really well is the best way to be able to create the most engaging content for them. Like genuinely, I think that's one of the most important things to be a communicator.
It requires an attitudinal shift as well. So our very first piece of work with UHB, with the hospital in Birmingham, was with the ED. And you can imagine the environment that they were in. And they couldn't get cut through on their communication. And it was because no one on the ED read their emails. Because they're working on the ED. That's the reality. And so we wrote an initial report that had on the front page a quote that said, there's lots of things that are important about the job that I do, but reading my emails is not one of them, or something like that. And it was like, that's the report. And we went out and said, you can resist it, you can try and find another solution, or you can acknowledge what is already happening. So we said, you don't have to read your emails. We will not communicate to you via email. Which sounds like a really simple thing to say, but it required a bit of an attitudinal shift because it's like, well, that's harder for us. Yeah, it is. But you're not getting any cut through in your messaging, so you have to do something differently. And that was actually around really effectively communicating in the break rooms. What can we use the break rooms for? I mean, these are not super complicated things, but it's like go to where the audience is and have an attitudinal shift that they are important, flip the structure upside down. Then you'll make something happen. But yeah, there is always a bit of an internal resistance.
Yeah. We are fast running out of time, but there is a question. You've already sort of touched on the high workloads point, but do you have kind of a main key strategy for building culture in a frontline environment? And I think to your point earlier about Liverpool FC with these especially like 0-hour contract people, like how do you create that culture?
Well, I've alluded to it. I think making that fundamental attitudinal shift that says that junior people and development and engagement of junior people should be a line item in budgets, just like refreshing an estate should be. Or whatever it might look like. We need to repaint the walls, but you need to invest in people as well. So that dynamic is not going to change. You can restructure as much as you want, but ultimately, if you're in a large multi-site organization, or you're running like a Liverpool, which is gathering people in temporarily and then them going out again, you are always going to have a strand of leadership that's going to manage most of the people. Making that attitudinal shift will mean, I'm less bothered about what you do than you do something, because even by not doing something, you're communicating something. So we deprioritize you. Yeah, I'm going to feel it. We prioritize you. Yeah, I'm going to feel it. So making that attitudinal shift and then going to where that audience is and saying, what makes the biggest difference to you? Let me genuinely live your life and stand in your shoes for a second, understand where do you get your information from? If I really believe that you care. So as an example, I've got junior managers' names in my phone and I'll text them every now and then and how's it going? Finding a steward and remembering their name and noticing that that they didn't have enough water on a hot match day at the beginning of the season and getting them some water. And it sounds really simple, but culture's built through loads of different actions over time. It's certainly not built through a slide deck sent down from above. It's go to where people are, find out what makes the biggest difference to them, and then communicate to them at scale in ways that feel really intimate. And so using something like Staffbase that says we can distribute content and create engagement that makes you feel part of something bigger than yourself. It's not actually about the tool for me, as it's about using that tool with the attitudinal shift, getting that bit that goes, actually, yes, we can do this, but how do we make sure that it's as intimate and matches where I am as closely as possible, because the audience will always tell, or can always tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to say with my old manager, if you tell someone what the culture is, then it's actually a cult.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's almost, actually, it's like, don't tell me what the culture is. I'll tell you through the way you behave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we are out of time, Tim, but that was a fab conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everyone else who joined, and for your questions, and Tim, obviously, for sharing your stories and experiences. Enjoy your weeks, everyone, and make sure you eat your frogs. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.